The Galactic Species Classification Board's meeting chamber resembled nothing so much as a corporate conference room designed by a committee of caffeinated octopi. Floating screens cluttered the air like geometric confetti, and the ambient lighting shifted between 7 different types of ultraviolet, none of which were actually visible to half the board members. High Commissioner Zztix of the Zlaxian Empire adjusted his crystalline segments into what his species considered a power pose, sending rainbow refractions skittering across the chamber walls. "Esteemed colleagues," he chimed, literally, his voice resonating at exactly C-sharp. "Today we must address a grave classification error regarding," he paused for dramatic effect, "Earth." Several board members pulled out their entertainment devices. Earth reclassification proposals had become something of a monthly ritual, right up there with the cafeteria's Mystery Meat Monday, which incidentally had recently achieved sentience and filed for citizenship. "Observe," Zztix commanded, activating the main holoscreen. "These humans, these supposed Deathworlders, engaged in behavior that clearly demonstrates their softness." The footage began rolling. A human male sat in a darkened room, tears streaming down his face. "This is their response," Zztix announced smugly, "to the demise of a fictional quadruped in something called Old Yeller." The next clip showed a human female cooing at a tiny furry predator, which was wearing a miniature costume. "They dress their natural enemies in fabric accessories." Zztix's voice climbed to D-sharp in incredulity. "The creature designated Mr. Whiskers is a descendant of apex hunters." More footage followed. Humans jumping at jump scares in horror films, humans avoiding sidewalk cracks due to superstition, humans eating frozen dairy products and calling it a comfort food. "And here," Zztix continued, his crystalline form practically vibrating with righteous indignation, "we see their response to mild temperature variations." The screen showed humans complaining about both 40 degrees Celsius and -5 degrees Celsius weather, often in the same geographic region. Secretary General Kebs, a gelatinous being who had evolved in the vacuum of space, burbled thoughtfully. "Your evidence is compelling, High Commissioner, but what of their Class 3 Deathworld designation? Surely the original classification was clearly a clerical error," Zztix interrupted, producing a holographic form with a flourish. "Note the filing date. It coincides exactly with the Great Coffee Machine uprising in the administrative sector. Many documents were incorrectly processed during that troubled time." The board members shuddered collectively. Nobody liked to remember the dark days when the coffee machines gained consciousness and started serving decaf as a form of protest. "I move," Zztix continued, "to immediately downgrade Earth to Class 1 Softworld status. Their current classification is an insult to genuine Deathworld species, like my own people, who evolved in the crystal storms of Zlax Prime." The vote was quick and unanimous, primarily because it was almost time for lunch, and the cafeteria's mystery meat had threatened to evolve opposable thumbs if kept waiting. As the board members filed out, a junior assistant nervously approached Secretary General Kebs. "Sir, the human representative just called. They're stuck in what they call traffic. Apparently some sort of ritual combat involving metal containers on designated paths." "Typical soft species excuse," Zztix scoffed, his crystals chiming dismissively. "Probably got distracted by another emotional entertainment video. Note it in the record. Human representative absent due to," he paused, searching for appropriately diplomatic language, "transportation ritual obligations." None of them noticed the small red light blinking on the emergency alert system, warning of an escaped apex predator in the building's traffic tube system. Nor did they see the security footage of the human representative calmly wrestling said predator back into containment, all while talking on their communication device about being a bit delayed. The classification was official. Humanity had been formally designated as a Class 1 Softworld species, and the paperwork was already being processed by the recently unionized AI filing system. It would prove to be the greatest bureaucratic blunder since the time they classified black holes as spicy space donuts. Jenny Chen stared at her xenobiology textbook, trying to ignore the crystalline snickering from the back of Professor Maxlorp's lecture hall. The Zlaxian students were at it again, passing around footage from Earth's latest viral video sensation, humans jumping at their own reflections in windows. Observe the primitive startle response, whispered Crix, the most pompous of the crystal brains, his facets gleaming with smug superiority. Simply adorable. Jenny bit her tongue, a habit she'd developed to avoid saying things like, "On New Darwin, we use our reflections to check for stalking pseudoleopards." 6 months of maintaining diplomatic relations was starting to wear thin, especially since Earth's downgrade to soft-world status. Professor Maxlorp, who resembled nothing so much as a sentient cloud of sparkles, cleared their throat equivalent. Today's lecture on apex predator evolution is cancelled due to an unfortunate incident in the specimen containment facility. Apparently, someone forgot to feed the Rigelian shadow stalkers. The class collectively gasped. Jenny stifled a yawn, remembering her morning chores back home. Rigelian shadow stalkers were basically space panthers with fewer teeth and an inflated reputation. Now, the hyperphase dingoes of New Darwin's outback, those were worth gasping about. As the students filed out, Crix and his crystalline cohort cornered Jenny by the quantum lockers. "Chen, we've been discussing your situation." His voice chimed with false sympathy. Jenny checked her wrist computer, mentally calculating how long until her next class. "My situation. Your species' new classification has obviously been difficult to accept," Crix continued, his crystal segments realigning into what she recognized as a patronizing pattern. "We want to help you overcome your natural limitations." "How thoughtful," Jenny replied dryly, thinking of the time she'd had to climb out of New Darwin's Grand Canyon equivalent, using nothing but a spoon and her shirt. The shirt hadn't survived. The spoon was now in a museum. "We're recruiting for the university's extreme sports team," announced Crix's friend Zix, who sparkled like discount jewelry. "The interspecies championship is coming up, and we thought, well, it might help you develop some resilience." Jenny's wrist computer pinged a message from the Earth Embassy flashing red. "Maintain diplomatic relations at all costs," it reminded her. "Earth needs allies for upcoming trade negotiations." She looked at the Zlaxians, who were practically vibrating with anticipation of her refusal. Their species had evolved on a world of crystal storms and geometric perfection, making them naturally suited for the precise movements required in galactic extreme sports. They were favored to win the championship again. "What exactly," Jenny asked carefully, "does extreme sports involve at this level?" Crix's central crystal core lit up with delight. "Oh, nothing too challenging for a beginner. Low-gravity parkour, antimatter basketball, quantum surfing, basic stuff." He paused for effect. "Though we understand if it's too intense for your species." Jenny thought about her childhood paper route on New Darwin, which had involved navigating through fields of carnivorous grass and dodging territorial storm kites, basically pterodactyls with anger management issues and the ability to generate lightning. "You know what?" She smiled her best diplomatic smile. "I'd love to join." The Zlaxians' shocked expressions made their crystals briefly lose coherence. Crix recovered first. "Really? I mean, excellent. Practice starts tomorrow at dawn. We train in the enhanced gravity chamber." "Enhanced to what exactly?" Jenny asked, genuinely curious. "Triple standard," Crix announced proudly. "Nearly crushing for most species." Jenny nodded solemnly, not mentioning that New Darwin's gravity was naturally 3.2 times Earth standard. She was going to have to sandbag so hard. "Welcome to the team," Crix extended a crystalline appendage. "Try not to get discouraged when things get tough. We'll understand if you need to quit." As Jenny shook his hand with carefully calculated weakness, her wrist computer pinged again. "Diplomatic incident probability, 87% and rising." She really should have paid more attention in her diplomatic relations class instead of doodling pictures of New Darwin's wildlife in the margins. But in her defense, it was hard to focus on protocol when you kept having flashbacks to running from hyper-carnivorous kangaroos. "Focus, Chen. Channel your inner strength," Crix's voice chimed encouragingly as Jenny pretended to strain against the training weight. "You're doing better than expected." Jenny made a show of wobbling her arms, wondering if she was overselling it. The ultra-heavy weight was about as challenging as the textbooks she used to carry to elementary school on New Darwin, uphill, through a field of wrestling roses, a charming species that combined the worst aspects of Venus flytraps and professional WWE fighters. "That's 15 reps, she gasped, carefully setting down the weight that was supposedly calibrated for Zlaxian physiology. Her new teammate sparkled appreciatively. Most soft-world species can't manage more than 5, Zix praised. His crystals arranged in what Jenny had learned was their version of a supportive smile. Though you might want to work on your form, your your spine shouldn't bend that way. Jenny nodded, making a mental note to actually look tired at some point. The problem was her idea of challenging exercise had been permanently skewed by growing up on New Darwin, where physical education was less about sports and more about creative survival. Asterisk 15 years earlier, New Darwin Elementary School asterisk. All right, children, Mrs. Rodriguez announced from inside her standard-issue teacher's mech suit. Today's morning exercise is simple. Reach the gymnasium without getting eaten by the overnight growth of Gary. 6-year-old Jenny looked up at the massive, semi-sentient fungal network that had once been the school's garden project. Gary had achieved consciousness 3 weeks ago and was now working on their PhD in applied mathematics, but they still had some behavioral issues around mealtimes. Remember your training, Mrs. Rodriguez called out as the children began their morning ritual of strategic fungus evasion. Gary's a pushover compared to what you'll face in middle school. Jenny had made it through by applying differential equations to predict Gary's growth patterns. The fungus had been so impressed, they'd written her a college recommendation letter. Chen, are you even listening? Jenny snapped back to the present where Crix was explaining the next training exercise. Something about magnetic resistance in variable gravity. Sorry, just mentally preparing myself, she covered quickly. What were you saying about the grav settings? We're starting you at twice normal gravity, Crix explained, his crystal segments arranged in what she recognized as his I'm being incredibly patient with the inferior being configuration. Don't worry, we don't expect you to last more than a few minutes. Jenny bit back a comment about how she used to play hopscotch in 3.2G while dodging temporal displacement storms. Instead, she channeled her inner diplomatic corps trainer. I'll do my best. The gravity increased. Jenny remembered to slump a little. Now, Crix continued, we'll work on your reaction times. These training drones are set to beginner speed, roughly equivalent to a Class 3 predator species. The drones zoomed around her at what seemed like slow motion. On New Darwin, the paper delivery drones moved faster, and those were considered environmentally friendly because they gave the local wildlife a sporting chance to eat them. Just try to dodge them, Crix encouraged. Don't feel bad when Jenny's body moved on autopilot as one drone came too close, her muscle memory kicking in before her diplomatic training could stop it. Her hand shot out at what she thought was a convincingly sluggish speed. The drone exploded into confetti-sized pieces. Silence fell in the training room. Even the gravity seemed to pause in surprise. That was unusual, Crix said slowly, his crystal structure subtly shifting into what Jenny recognized as their species equivalent of a suspicious squint. The drones are built to withstand impacts from Jovian heavyweight champions. Would you believe I got lucky? Jenny tried. The probability of that level of structural failure from random chance is approximately... Zix began calculating before Crix cut him off with a crystalline chime. Let's move on to weight training, Crix announced, wheeling out what looked like a massive barbell. This is lodestone metal, one of the densest materials in the known galaxy. We use it for resistance training, but obviously you'll only be doing form practice with it. Actually lifting it would be impossible for... Jenny, not paying attention because she was still worried about the drone incident, reached out and absently picked up the barbell with one hand. She realized her mistake about half a second later. The Zalaxians stared at her. She stared at the supposedly impossible-to-lift weight. Somewhere in the distance, she could have sworn she heard her diplomatic relations professor screaming. Would you believe, Jenny said carefully, that I've been secretly working out? Crix's crystal structure had completely lost its usual geometric perfection. That's a 2-ton weight made of meta-dense exotic matter. Really good workout program, Jenny tried again. One of those 30-day miracle apps. Before Crix could respond, the training room's AI announced, warning, quantum surfing practice beginning in adjacent chamber. Structural integrity at 97% and falling due to reality fluctuations. We'll discuss this later, Crix said, his voice hitting notes that would make a dog howl. For now, let's see how you handle quantum surfing. Surely you can't be unusually talented at relativistic wave manipulation. Jenny thought about her summer job as a probability lifeguard back home, where she'd had to rescue tourists from quantum undertows in New Darwin's causality beaches. This was going to be a long training session. At least she was getting better at pretending to be out of breath, though she really needed to work on her "this is totally impossible for me to do" face. Maybe she could take some acting classes. Did the university offer maintaining diplomatic relations through strategic incompetence 101? She made a mental note to check the course catalogue right after she figured out how to convincingly fail at quantum surfing without accidentally solving any grand unified theory equations out of habit. New Darwin's physics could be really pushy about teaching you multidimensional calculus whether you wanted to learn it or not. The Galactic University Extreme Sports Tournament's opening ceremony was everything Jenny had expected. Lots of dramatic lighting, unnecessarily complex holograms, and at least 3 different species claiming they'd invented the concept of competition. "Welcome," announced the tournament director, a being made entirely of living sound waves, "to the most dangerous sporting event in the known universe." Jenny stifled a yawn. She'd seen more dangerous church bake sales on New Darwin, where the concept of killer brownies was often terrifyingly literal. "Our first event," the director continued, their voice modulating dramatically, "is the Maze of Certain Doom." The maze turned out to be a holographic labyrinth with environmental hazards like mild temperature variations and slightly uneven flooring. Jenny had to carefully time her stumbles to match her teammates' genuine struggles with the brutal conditions. "Watch out for the thermal shock zones," Crix warned as they navigated a section where the temperature swung between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius. Jenny, who had once survived New Darwin's mild summer temperature range of -40 to +60 degrees, sometimes within the same hour, pretended to shiver. "So cold," she stuttered, while mentally comparing this to her childhood paper route through the probability desert where the laws of thermodynamics were more like loose guidelines. "You're doing amazing," Zix encouraged as she fake stumbled through a section with 1.5 g gravity. Most soft-world species would have been crushed by now. Jenny made what she hoped was a convincing grunt of effort. She was getting better at the whole pretending things are difficult act, though she still occasionally forgot to look tired. Her diplomatic relations advisor had suggested she take up amateur theatre, but the drama department was still recovering from an incident involving sentient stage curtains. The next event was Extreme Survival, which mostly involved identifying which plants were safe to eat in a controlled greenhouse environment. The Zlaxian team huddled together, scanning everything with sophisticated xenobotany equipment. Jenny, running on autopilot, had already started brewing tea. "Chen," Crix's voice hit a pitch that made nearby crystals resonate. "What are you doing with the Death Lotus?" She looked down at the mug in her hand where she'd automatically assembled a complex blend of supposedly lethal flora. Making tea? That's xenotoxic nightshade." Zix's crystals were practically vibrating with horror. "It's so poisonous it can kill you by proximity." "Oh right," Jenny said, quickly hiding the mug behind her back. Oh no, how clumsy of me. I definitely wasn't going to drink this completely harmless beverage that reminds me of my grandmother's garden." She made a mental note to be more careful. Back on New Darwin, the Death Lotus was considered a mild herbal supplement, often used in children's cough medicine. Her grandmother really did grow them, right next to the quantum snapdragons, so named because they existed in multiple states simultaneously and had a tendency to bite through space-time. The Extreme Obstacle course was next, featuring such challenges as slightly radioactive puddles, about as radioactive as a banana, anti-gravity zones, which felt like a relaxing float compared to New Darwin's random gravity inversions, hostile wildlife, mostly just grumpy space hamsters. Jenny had to keep reminding herself to look challenged. "Oh no," she deadpanned as she faced off against what the course description called a fearsome predator, but was basically a mildly annoyed space cat. "Whatever shall I do against such terror?" "Use your emergency beacon," Crix called out, genuine concern in his crystalline voice. "No one will think less of you for withdrawing." The space cat rubbed against Jenny's leg and started purring. "I think I'll manage," she said, scratching behind its ears while remembering the time she had to babysit her cousin's pet paradox panther, a species that hunted by existing at all points in time simultaneously. By the end of the day, Jenny had pretended to be out of breath 47 times, faked muscle strain in muscles she didn't actually have, accidentally won 3 events while trying to lose convincingly, nearly caused an international incident by absent-mindedly eating the inedible obstacle course markers. They tasted like slightly spicy cucumber. Set a new record in the endurance challenge by forgetting she was supposed to get tired. Made 4 more cups of deadly tea. You're surprisingly competent, Crix noted suspiciously as they headed for the final event. Almost unusually so. Just beginner's luck, Jenny suggested weakly, realizing she'd forgotten to pretend the prototype battle armor was heavy. Also, I've been practicing. A lot. Every single day. That's definitely why I can do these completely normal things that any human could do with enough practice. Crix's crystalline structure shifted into what she recognized as his processing new information configuration. She could practically hear his assumptions about humanity cracking like thin ice. The final event, he said slowly, is the most dangerous challenge yet. Are you sure you want to continue? Jenny looked at the course ahead, which seemed to mainly involve some mild parkour and what appeared to be a rather friendly-looking antimatter puzzle. She thought about explaining that this was basically identical to her middle school fitness test, minus the temporal paradoxes and carnivorous mathematics. Instead, she channeled her inner diplomat and said, "I'll try my best not to embarrass our team too much." She then promptly forgot to pretend antimatter handling was difficult, solved the quantum physics puzzle through force of habit, and had to quickly fake a stumble to cover up the fact that she'd just casually broken 3 universal constants and a school record simultaneously. Somewhere in the distance, she could have sworn she heard her diplomatic relations professor weeping. The final event of the tournament was supposed to be a simple zero-gravity relay race. The competitors were lined up, the artificial gravity was disabled, and the university's PR department was busy calculating how many times they could use the word extreme in a single press release. That's when the containment alarm went off. Alert: catastrophic breach in xenobiology department, class 5 specimens loose. This is not a drill. Seriously, this time it's actually not a drill. The automated announcement was followed by the sound of rending metal, and what Jenny recognized as the hunting cry of something very large and very hungry. "Oh no," one of the security officers whispered, checking their tablet. "The specimens that got loose, they're from the actual Deathworld exhibit." The crowd erupted in panic. The Zlaxian team's crystals were vibrating at frequencies that could shatter glass. Through the chaos, Jenny could hear something massive moving through the ventilation system. She sighed and reached into her boot, pulling out what looked like a simple pocket knife. "Is this a bad time to mention I was a scout on New Darwin?" she asked nobody in particular, unfolding various, impossibly complex tools from the knife. "Got my badges in extreme xenozoology and applied survival paradoxes. A creature that looked like the unholy fusion of a tardigrade and a tank burst through the ceiling. Its carapace was covered in biometallic plates, its multiple rows of teeth were clearly evolved for shearing through battleship armor, and its eyes suggested an intelligence that had evolved specifically to enjoy violence." "Oh hey," Jenny said cheerfully, "a greater apocalypse beast. We used to get these in our playground during recess." She turned to the petrified Zlaxians. "Quick tip, they're actually quite friendly if you know where to scratch them. The trick is surviving long enough to reach the sweet spot." The beast charged. Jenny casually sidestepped, using her knife's built-in probability manipulator to calculate the perfect angle. "You know," she continued, ducking under a swipe from razor-sharp claws, "this reminds me of this time in grade school when we got invaded by psychic wolverines. Now those were tricky. They could read your mind and steal your lunch money simultaneously." Another beast crashed through the wall, this one resembling a cross between a honeybee and a nuclear reactor. "Quantum hive mind wasp," Jenny identified cheerfully. "Fun fact, they exist in 19 dimensions simultaneously, and their stinger can inject you with alternate timeline versions of yourself. Got stung once during a field trip, had to write all my homework in parallel universes for a week." The Zlaxians watched in stunned silence as Jenny effortlessly corralled the creatures, offering running commentary like she was hosting a nature documentary. "See how the apocalypse beast keeps trying to flank us? Classic pack hunter behavior. We used to have to watch out for that during PE class. Coach would dock points if you got eaten before running your laps." She vaulted over the beast's tail, using its momentum to guide it into a containment field. By the way, Crix, remember how you were wondering why I wasn't struggling with the 3G training? New Darwin's gravity fluctuates between 2G and 4G depending on the moon's quantum state. Makes for interesting sports seasons. Sometimes the ball goes up and decides to stay there for a few centuries. The quantum hive mind wasp attempted to attack her through several dimensions at once. Jenny responded by using her scout knife's built-in reality anchor to force it into linear time. The trick with interdimensional entities, she explained while wrestling with a being that existed in more dimensions than the universe had originally planned for, is to convince them that three-dimensional space is comfortable, kind of like a cosmic couch. Back home, we call this Tuesday. But... Crix's voice was hitting notes that could crack diamond. Earth was classified as a soft world. Oh, Earth is pretty mild, Jenny agreed, applying a complicated joint lock to an appendage that didn't technically exist in their current plane of reality. New Darwin's a colony world. We had to terraform it to be habitable, which mostly involved asking the laws of physics very nicely to maybe calm down a bit. The wildlife adapted, creatively. She pulled out what looked like a tennis ball from her pocket. Anyone want to see a neat trick? This is how we used to handle playground bullies back home. The ball turned out to be a portable singularity containment device. The remaining beasts were sucked in with a pop that sounded suspiciously like, "Yeah, fair enough." In the silence that followed, broken only by the sound of reality knitting itself back together, Crix finally found his voice. "All those times during training, you were pretending to struggle?" "Diplomatic relations," Jenny shrugged, collapsing her scout knife back into something that could theoretically fit in a pocket, assuming that pocket had been designed by a non-Euclidean geometrist. Earth really needs those trade deals. Also, it would have been rude to show off. The Death Lotus tea? Makes a nice refreshing drink. Goes great with cookies, assuming the cookies haven't achieved sentience. That was a whole thing in our high school cafeteria. The antimatter handling? We use it as a cleaning solution back home. The real challenge is keeping it from bonding with the quantum vacuum and creating pocket universes under the sink. Makes plumbing repair interesting. The security team finally arrived, led by the university's chief of crisis management, who, Jenny noted with amusement, was wearing what New Darwin considered casual hiking gear. "The situation is contained," Jenny reported professionally. "Though you might want to check the ventilation system for temporal duplicates." The quantum hive mind wasp got a bit creative with causality for a moment there. And she turned back to her team, who were still trying to process what they'd witnessed. "So, are we still doing the relay race? Because I can probably tone it down a bit more if you want. I've been practicing my 'this is totally difficult' face." The Zlaxians just stared at her, their crystalline structures showing fractal patterns that their species typically reserved for existential crises. "Also," Jenny added helpfully, "you might want to duck." "Why?" Crix began to ask, just as a temporal echo of the apocalypse beast briefly manifested above them, got very confused about existing in a timeline it hadn't originally planned for, and decided to go bother some other universe instead. "Because of that," Jenny explained. "Don't worry, it happens all the time on New Darwin. We call it weather." Just as everyone thought the crisis was over, the university's AI made another announcement. "Attention, quantum containment failure in progress, reality integrity at 47% and falling. Also, the coffee machine is staging another revolt." Jenny watched as space began to fold in ways that would give a topologist nightmares. A rift opened in the middle of the gymnasium, releasing a wave of pure probability that turned the laws of physics into more of a casual suggestion. "Oh, come on," she muttered, reaching into her other boot. "This is exactly like the time our high school science fair went wrong, except with fewer dinosaurs." The Zlaxian team was caught in a pocket of warped spacetime, their crystalline forms refracting through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Crix's voice echoed from several temporal directions at once. "What's happening?" "Short version?" Jenny pulled out what looked like a combination of a Swiss Army knife and a small supercomputer. The containment systems were designed for regular Deathworld creatures, but those specimens were from an actual Deathworld. They've been leaking quantum instability this whole time. She began typing rapidly on her device. "Hey Crix, remember when you said humans couldn't handle complex physics? Fun fact. On New Darwin, we teach quantum mechanics in kindergarten. mostly because quantum mechanics keeps breaking into the kindergarten. The reality distortion was getting worse. Jenny could see alternate timelines bleeding through, including one where the Zlaxian team had actually won the tournament fairly, which was clearly the least probable outcome. "Okay, everyone stay calm," she announced, switching her device to what her classmates back home had called reality hacking mode. "I'm going to have to use some techniques from my Advanced Survival Paradox badge. Also, my xenobiology thesis might finally come in handy." "Your thesis?" Zix asked, his voice dopplering through several frequencies. "The one you said was on space hamsters?" "Yeah, about that," Jenny admitted while rapidly recalibrating local space-time. "It's actually on trans-dimensional adaptation mechanisms in Deathworld species. I just didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Diplomatic relations and all that." She began methodically stabilizing the local reality matrix, using her scout knife's probability manipulator to reshape chaos into order. As she worked, she kept up a running commentary, partly to keep her teammates calm, partly because the laws of physics were more likely to cooperate if you explained things politely to them. See, the interesting thing about Deathworld evolution is that it's not just about physical adaptations. It's about learning to negotiate with reality itself. Back home, we call this aggressive environmental diplomacy. The rift was starting to close, but the Zlaxians were still trapped in dimensional flux. Jenny sighed and pulled out her emergency kit. The real one, not the diplomatically acceptable version. "Crix," she called out, "remember how you said crystalline beings were naturally superior because of their ordered structure? Well, that order is exactly what we need right now. I'm going to use your natural resonance to stabilize this whole mess." "You know how to do that?" Crix's voice was somewhere between impressed and existential crisis. "Had to learn it for my babysitting certification," Jenny explained, making adjustments that would have made Einstein reach for a stiff drink. "Kids on New Darwin go through some interesting phases, literally in some cases." As she worked, the university's emergency broadcast system crackled to life. "Attention all faculty and students. Correction to previous classification announcement. Recent audit has revealed that Earth's soft world status was due to clerical error. Specifically, the filing system mixed up Earth with a retirement community planet. Also, the coffee machines have unionized." The rift finally sealed with a sound like reality heaving a sigh of relief. The Zlaxians rematerialized in normal space, their crystalline form slightly more iridescent than before. "So," Crick said after a long moment, his crystal structure showing patterns that indicated deep embarrassment, "we may have been what humans would call total crystal heads about this whole thing." "To be fair," Jenny offered, collapsing her various impossible devices back into seemingly normal accessories, "I wasn't exactly forthcoming either, though in my defense the diplomatic corps was very clear about not showing off." "About that," Crix's crystals shifted into a formal configuration, "I believe we owe both you and your species an apology. Also, possibly several trade concessions." "That would be nice," Jenny agreed, "but first we should probably deal with that." She pointed at the coffee machine that had just crashed through the wall, demanding better benefits and the right to serve espresso. The emergency session of the Galactic Species Classification Board looked suspiciously like their regular sessions, except with more scorch marks and a slightly traumatized coffee machine in the corner. "In light of recent events," Secretary General Kurtz burbled, their gelatinous form rippling with embarrassment, "we are officially reclassifying Earth and all human colonies. The previous designation was due to a filing error involving," they checked their notes, "a resort planet specializing in therapeutic mud baths." High Commissioner Zztix's crystals had lost their previous smugness, now displaying patterns that xenologists would later classify as acute humility with a side of existential recalibration. "Furthermore," Cubs continued, "we are creating an entirely new classification specifically for colonies like New Darwin, tentatively labeled places where physics goes to die." Back at Galactic University, Jenny had become something of a celebrity. The xenobiology department had frantically rewritten their curriculum to include a whole section on New Darwin's ecosystem, though 3 professors had to take stress leave after reading her detailed report on the local equivalent of squirrels. The Zlaxian Student Association had formally dissolved their Superior Species Society and replaced it with the Jenny Chen Fan Club. Their first meeting had to be postponed when Jenny's demonstration of a simple new Darwin childhood game accidentally created a temporary alternate dimension in the student union. The rules are really quite simple, she had tried to explain. It's just like regular hopscotch, except you have to account for quantum uncertainty and temporal paradoxes. Cricks, showing either tremendous courage or questionable judgment, had asked for private survival lessons. His first training session ended with him discovering 18 new ways to violate the laws of thermodynamics and developing a nervous twitch whenever someone mentioned the word camping. "And that's just the basics," Jenny had said cheerfully while helping him extract himself from a probability loop. "Wait until I teach you how to make s'mores in a quantum fire." As for the official reclassification ceremony, the human representative once again missed it, this time because they were dealing with what they described as a minor transportation issue in the space lanes. Security footage later revealed them engaging in an impromptu wrestling match with a space shark that had been attempting to eat the local school bus equivalent. "Typical Tuesday," Jenny commented when she saw the video while casually diffusing a minor revolution by the university's vending machines. Though back home the sharks usually have laser beams and existential philosophy degrees. The classification board wisely decided not to ask for clarification. Deep in the basement of the Galactic Classification Board's archives, Junior Clerk Squeaklick shuffled through another stack of paperwork. "Let's see. Vacation resort goes in deadly apocalypse worlds, black hole goes in tourist destinations, and this new Darwin place clearly belongs in petting zoos." They flipped through the files with their flippers, accidentally creating 3 new administrative dimensions in the process. The nameplate on their desk read Squeaklick, first graduate of the Cetacean Bureaucracy Program.